Good evening, everybody, and welcome back to Addressing the Issue with your host, Andy Streisfeld. And we are now in episode 2 of our multi-episode arc on the Canadian identity and in regards to foreign intervention and foreign interference. As I said before, this episode is being filmed after Canada Day, so happy Canada Day to all of you who are tuning in. Canada is 156 years young, but has also had its tumultuous changes in the last few years, including with COVID and everything that came with it. And we are now moving towards some sort of semblance of order, but yet now we face this dilemma of foreign interference and foreign intervention in our affairs. And as we spoke last week to Dr. Edgar in regards to peacekeeping and peacemaking and how that also affects foreign intervention, we're going to go a little bit further. I'm going now into the other realm. We're talking about television and movies. And with us right now tonight remotely is Paul Aitken. He is the co-executive producer and writer for multiple years on the Murdoch Mysteries on CBC, and he's with us here tonight. Hey, Paul, how are you?
I'm doing great, thank you.
All right, so full disclosure, I'm a big fan. And most specifically of the 2 or 3 characters that you bring and your team bring to life in writing. And that is Secret Agent Myers and Clegg, the American-Canadian battle of wits. And it's interesting, and for the crowd and for ourselves, we'd like to just get this started. How did this come about? And is there a kernel of truth to the fictional sensational relationship that we see occasionally on the episodes?
Well, let's address the first question first, which
Sure.
is how did it come about? It was an idea I'd had, I think it was in season 4, because I had done some reading on the American Civil War and the existence of what I think were called the Copperheads, which were a group of people that were opposed to the war. And there was talk even then of possible a third secession from the Union. And of course, if that were to happen, that would vastly weaken this dominant country that was to our south, and it would have made not that Canada was ever a power. Canada didn't even exist at this moment, but there was always a concern that with the concept of manifest destiny, which was, at least 20 years old at this point when the Civil War happened, that the Americans would eventually invade Canada. So it was obviously of great interest that Canada, the British colonies that exist in the space that we now call Canada, resist this. And it made sense that there would be, because there was a lot of Confederate activity in Canada at that time. And it made sense that there might be some people in the Canadian government that might surreptitiously assist the American government and assist the Confederacy in their breakup, or assist the Copperheads in their efforts to stop the war. And if this happened, of course, that would put a serious strain on them. If it was ever discovered that this happened, would put a serious strain on the relationship between Canada, which existed now, and the American government. And that was the basic idea that we had for this episode. And of course, to make that work, we had to create an entity, the Clegg character, that would represent the danger that America presented to Canada in this regard. And the idea was that if the Americans found out that Canada had aided the Confederacy in the time of the Civil War, that war was possible with Canada. And yeah, that was how that idea began. It became a much more convoluted plot than that, but that's how that character was created. Yeah.
All right, so the relationship between Clegg and Myers, is there a kernel of reality in a sense? Like, is there, because I'll give you the kudos, you write them so well that it's almost reality to me.
Okay. I think I don't know if anyone like Clegg would have existed. I don't think he would have ever have had the power that he attained within the government. I don't think that at war at this point, then this would have been around 1900, would have actually been something that would have been prosecuted by the Americans. But it wasn't impossible. And I like the idea of an American character, Clegg, who was obsessed with Canada. And basically his whole effort throughout the entire series until his eventual death was towards that ambition. Everything he did was to try to trick Americans into invading Canada because he really, really wanted Canada.
All right.
So that is that true? Would anyone have felt that way? I don't know, but our character did.
All right. So I'm not going to try to emulate Yannick Bisson in any way, but Terrence Myers. Let's talk about him for a few moments.
Again, if you're asking would he have existed, I don't know. There was no Secret Service that we know of at this time. That was something that was, the CSIS was created later. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't an interest, of course, in what would be in the domain of the Secret Service, CSIS, before their official creation. There would have been people, obviously, in the government that were aware of potential threats and dangers and would have been tasked with at least identifying those issues and bringing them to the attention of the government.
All right. We're going to take a small commercial break. We're going to be back with Paul Aitken here on Addressing the Issues.
This program is brought to you by Ignite TV. Now you're in command. Visit Rogers.com for more details.
It was the most enchanting evening of my entire life.
Watch all your favorite heartwarming episodes of When Calls the Heart on demand.
Be ashamed to put my talent to waste.
And cherish all the seasons from the beginning.
Well, it sounds pretty good to me.
And be sure to join us July 30th for the much-anticipated 10th season.
This is so exciting. Fantastic!
When Calls the Heart, seasons 1 to 9, only on Super Channel On Demand.
It was our 35th anniversary. To celebrate, we were on our way to Mama Rosie's, where we had our first date. That's when we heard coming from the radio. So we stopped and listened. It helped us get to safety. So when I think of our anniversary, because now we have even more to celebrate.
It's entertaining made easy. Set the scene with decor, food, fashion, and fun. Join Carolina Suarez for Tapestry House Style Wednesdays at 6:30 p.m. on Rogers TV.
South Coast Jazz Festival is celebrating their 10th anniversary with 10 decades of music in Port Dover and at the Brantford Sanderson Center. Experience a 3-day musical journey from the 1930s until today. See Mark Holmes of Platinum Blonde, Mark Kelso and the Jazz Exiles, Shara Suri, and many more. South Coast Jazz Festival, August 11th to 13th. Tickets at southcoastjazz.com.
All right, welcome back to Addressing the Issues with me, Andy Streisel. We have Paul Aitken remotely here with us tonight. So, when addressing the Canadian identity in movies and TV, it seems to be a difficult task when a Canadian character is distinguished from a normal stereotype. So, in the case of most writers, most actors, most producers are either going to go to an extreme and do a Dudley Do-Right or a Mackenzie Brothers. But you've succeeded with your characters, not only in Terrence Myers and in William Murdoch, but also in James Pendrick as well. How did you do it?
Create those characters, or
like, how did you avoid that stereotype? Like, you don't make any one of them seem the extreme. So I'm interested, how were you able to make a Canadian without being extreme about it?
Well, I think as long as you create a situation and you have believable characters exist within that situation, I think you don't have to worry about presenting a particular cliche Canadian point of view. You just have characters that exist in this world that you've created, and they behave and act according to their character and according to their situation. And that's really all there is to it. Pendrick was a creation of, we wanted someone to personify the age of, this particular time when Murdoch, certainly in the early years, that feeling that anything was possible and that technology will save us and a certain form of capitalism will save us. And I thought they've always been, all of them have been true to their characters.
So in our last episode, Dr. Edgar and I were talking about the famous Avro Arrow and how that was one of the most overt ways of foreign intervention. They've actually scuttled technology. So I turned to poor Pendrick, and I see that the Americans are scuttling every technological advancement. Is there something, a grain of truth like in that? Did you perceive that Pendrick needed an American foil as opposed to a Canadian one?
I think we had in not just Clegg, but the actor who portrays him, Matthew Bennett, was such an exceptional actor, and he inhabited that character so perfectly. He really stood out. I mean, Clegg was created just as a one-off. He was going to be a character that was going to exist for that episode alone. But when obviously Matthew Bennett played him with such chilling accuracy, we brought him back. We brought him back in the following season, and then we brought him back in season 6 for that episode because he was a natural foil. And that, you mentioned the Avro Arrow, that was very much in our minds when we basically created that episode. And I mean, in that episode, we learn a little bit more about Clegg, and we learned that he's more ruthless than we had ever imagined. But it all seemed to fit. And so.
But when it comes down to Pendrick, it seems that he's had U.S. oil interests try to scuttle his car. He's had his wife try to burn him with a microwave weapon, she's an American by choice. So is there something like tongue-in-cheek? Are we? But then again, I see that you also have the hand, both the Imperial Chinese and the mafia involved in Canadian interests. So you're bringing a lot of foreign entities into the country, and I'm just interested, is that something that came before all this came out?
I think Canada's always existed in the world. There was a world out there during the time that our show was set, and whether we've always wanted to pursue those kind of ideas. We've always wanted to. Canada is not alone in the world. It has to interact with the world, and the reality is that Canada was a weak. It wasn't a power. It was a weak nation, dominated by the nation to the south, but it also yearned to be a part in international affairs. It also was highly, very, very British. It was, we saw ourselves as being British. A lot of the people who existed at this time were born in Britain. And so that was also a component. Canada was legally tied to Britain through the BNA Act. And it was also, in terms of the dominant forces and the dominant population were very much attached to Britain. So there was always that relationship. So yes, we felt the love for Britain, the fear of the States, and we also wanted to extend ourselves because we were a country and we wanted to exert ourselves in the world, assert ourselves. And so everything we've written about that basically is a nod to that reality.
So your series is very popular in the United States. It's actually called The Artful Detective. It's popular internationally. The ratings are through the roof. When I took a look at the last time, there were more people watching it in a certain ratio than other places before. And there was an article in which Yannick Bisson, who plays the William Murdoch character, where he floated this concept. He said that we play up the differences between Canada and the United States in our stories, and sometimes this clicks with people and sometimes it doesn't. But the statistic of the Americans who are interested cannot come to grasp the idea that we are a British-oriented, British-cultured society. So as you move forward in the timeline, I'm not asking you to betray any future stories, but as you move in there, will Canadians ever be Americans, or will they still have that innocence of what we long for in our true Canada today, where we have an origin story and we follow, the British principle rather than be assimilated into an American system?
That's a really good question. I don't know where Canada is going in terms of its self-identity, its national identity. I think we will always have it. And I think there will always be a part of us that feels separate from America, especially now. I mean, but assuming that America isn't always going to be as fraught as it is, I still think that there will always be an element in Canada that wants to stay Canadian, and I also think that the composition of Canada is changing as well. And I think the idea of what Canada is has always been in flux, but I think that is also changing. 100 years ago, we thought of ourselves as a British-derived nation. We were associated with Britain. We were part of Britain. And I don't think anyone in this country really feels that anymore. But we will always have something that is, we'll take pride in Canada in a different way than a lot of other countries. I once went to Turkey, and I went to some kind of porcelain shop, and the man who worked there asked where we were from. And we said, Canada. And he said, oh, I love Canadians. And I thought, oh, yeah, sure. And so I tested. I said, well, okay, what do you like so much about Canadians? And he says, you're the only country that can laugh at yourselves. And I thought, okay, that's true. We can laugh at ourselves. We can basically take pot shots at ourselves. We don't take ourselves too seriously. And that is actually a national trait. And I don't imagine, given our situation, because it's born of our situation, that we'll ever lose that.
All right. We're going to take a commercial break here with Paul Aitken. This is Addressing the Issues.
My name is Chase Nicholas. I am a Mi'kmaq hockey player. Growing up, I always remember my family talking about the Mi'kmaq as the creators of the game of hockey. In grade 7, I did research on Mi'kmaq hockey sticks as the first sticks of the NHL. I found a Mi'kmaq hockey stick made in 1917, the same year the NHL was formed. I was surprised to find out the very stick I was holding was made by my great-great-grandfather, Alexander Cope. In 1934, an elder known as Old Joe Cope wrote a letter to the Halifax Herald claiming the Mi'kmaq created hockey. I found out later that I am a direct descendant of Old Joe Cope. There was a time when Mi'kmaq children were torn from their families and not allowed to speak their language, losing their words and stories. But the stories are coming back to us. Stepping on the ice, I take pride knowing the roots of the game of hockey stem from my ancestors in the Mi'kmaq Nation.
It was John's graduation. We were so proud. We all got together for a picnic. That's when we heard coming from the radio. So we stopped and we listened. It helped us get to safety. That's why when I think of John, because now he has a real future to look forward to.
Life can be stressful. I know that. We're here to help you. Simple, easy recipes, amazing guests. At Home with Chef D, Wednesdays, 6 p.m. on Rogers TV.
October 5th, 2014, my daughter was hit by a train. She was walking along the sides of the tracks, and it shattered her world.
All right, welcome back to Addressing the Issue. My guest, Paul Aitken, is on in remote from us here, and we've been talking about Murdoch Mysteries and how it's a microcosm of the relationship that we're trying to talk about Canadian identity and in facing some subtle aspects of foreign intervention. So here's where I'm going with this. And I don't know, I don't know if it's allowed, but it's like this. The longest airing show in Canadian history is The Beachcombers, 18 seasons. You are now starting season 17. So I'm hoping that you'll do 18 to 19. And where do we see the Canadian identity going forward? And I think right now, we are somewhere around, 1910, 1911?
I think we are going into 1912.
Okay. And are we planning to eventually talk about Canada and World War I, or are we trying to go slow? Like, are we?
Basically, the series has advanced according to the yearly calendar. So every season represents a year, which makes sense because our actors are obviously aging, and you want to encounter the world as it is changing. Your show is set in the world where time exists. So there has to be change, and it might as well be modeled on the change that actually happened.
No problem. So we come back and we talked about Canadian identity, the Canadian characterization that most people fall trap in. You haven't fallen trap in this. You've created a Canadian industrialist that unfortunately is at the suffering of Americans. You have created this spy versus spy battle fiesta when there was. You have Murdoch and Dr. Ogden visiting and meeting with key presidential leaders at the time of doing things. So now we come back to, I'm going to take this for people who are interested in you and what you do, and that's the writing for television. There have been successful Canadian characterizations. We talk about Due South, and that ran for a bit, and that introduced the idea of Benton Fraser, an upstanding Mountie, which I see that you somehow not copy it, but I see you emulate that in Murdoch's brother, in a sense.
Oh yeah, absolutely, 100%.
But you have, you've stayed away from the tongue-in-cheek slapshot type of hockey players in your episodes. You are more refined in the characterization of Canadians.
Well, it's also hockey was different then than it is now. There was no Broad Street bullies in hockey in those days. It was a different kind of game. It was rough and tough, and people still got their teeth knocked out, but it was still a gentlemanly game.
So if you were to guide future writers, people who are thinking about acting, people who are interested in the Canadian identity and who are going to try to portray us out there, what can you suggest that a Canadian actor should do to be more Canadian?
I don't think they have to be more Canadian, to be honest. I think anyone who lives in this country is a Canadian. So if you want to represent Canada, represent any person who lives in this country. I don't think there is such a thing anymore as anyone who's typically Canadian. There are Canadian institutions, and people will be a part of that. And there are Canadian stories because they exist within the confines of Canada. Obviously, we are a unique nation, and there are unique stories to tell within that context. But in terms of how you should portray Canada or Canadians, I don't really know.
All right. I'll give you a more refined point of view, because I have never seen this in American television, but you had a former prime minister act. You have a Dragon's Den member or a Shark Tank member. You've managed to put together elements of our society from other aspects into your show. So how did you write for that? How did you successfully meld those types of personalities into 1900 Canada?
Again, it was for instance, the Prime Minister, who is Stephen Harper, watched this show with his daughter, and he was the one, I believe, who approached Shaftesbury with an eye to being in an episode. And of course, we saw the potential in that. So we wrote an episode that included him. He was only in for one scene, and they had to shut the whole place down in order to accommodate him. We also wanted to get subsequent prime ministers. We would love to have Justin Trudeau play a young Wilfrid Laurier, but that didn't happen.
All right. No, it's interesting because, like I said, the concept of bringing in Dragon Den members or people from society, people from sports, people from other, it's an interesting concept, and you think that they're timeless when you bring them into your world. Like it's the predecessor of someone who's going to be for the future, right? So it's interesting, and from a writer's point of view, it's what kind of a challenge, like besides Prime Minister Harper, who else gave you a challenge in writing for these types of bringing a big name personality in who's not a traditional actor or actress?
Well, I think you have to adjust for whatever that person can do on screen, and we do. We've had several Canadian celebrities appear on the show. I can't number them all because I can't remember offhand. But what you always want to do is basically create a character that these people can play. And Arlene was obviously someone who had been in front of the camera, so she was very used to it. So she could actually take a role, and so we gave her a role, and it actually kind of made the episode, I thought. But as long as there's an interest from a well-known Canadian personality to be on the show, it certainly serves the interest of the show to have them on and give them a role. The audience recognizes them. Where Murdoch is playing elsewhere in the world, they might not know who that person is, but Canadians do. And I think people in the audience, enjoy that a bit. I think it's nice to see your own represented on the screen, and so we will, as long as the show exists, I imagine we'll continue to do that.
Well, I know, as I said before, you film in Brantford. This is a Brantford-based show, so you do great homage to our community by introducing Alexander Graham Bell here, and again, there is there's the concept here of what you do, and this has been a great honor meeting you, finally talking to you about it, and I really hope we can get you back for future episodes when we talk about culture and Canada's, one of Canada's and North America's popular television shows, detective shows. It's Paul Aitken, ladies and gentlemen, from Murdoch Mysteries. If you like what you see, please tune in every Friday at 6:30, and until then, I wish you a good day and stay safe.
Call the Rogers TV viewer response line, email us, or connect with us on social media.
South Coast Jazz Festival is celebrating their 10th anniversary with 10 decades of music in Port Dover and at the Brantford Sanderson Center. Experience a 3-day musical journey from the 1930s until today. See Mark Holmes of Platinum Blonde, Mark Kelso and the Jazz Exiles, Shara Suri, and many more. South Coast Jazz Festival, August 11th to 13th. Tickets at southcoastjazz.com.
It was my daughter's birthday. She was blowing out the candles on her cake when we heard coming from the TV. So we stopped and listened.